Jouer son rôle de chef de file et de coordinatrice en matière de santé mondiale, l'organisation doit être bien équipée. En mai dernier, lors de la dernière assemblée, nous n'étions pas encore prêts à décider sous quelle forme ce renforcement devrait avoir lieu. Et entre-temps, le groupe de travail sur le renforcement de la préparation et de la riposte de l'OMS aux urgences sanitaires s'est réuni à plusieurs reprises pour examiner les avantages d'un nouvel instrument international. La Suisse soutient pleinement les recommandations de ce groupe de travail. Et sur cette base, nous, les États membres, devons prendre une décision sur la suite du processus. Je le sais, mesdames et messieurs, nous ne sommes pas tous d'accord sur le chemin à suivre. Nous en sommes également conscients en Suisse. Mais les enjeux sont beaucoup trop élevés. Nous n'avons pas le droit d'échouer. La Suisse reste convaincue qu'il faut un instrument international de nature contraignante, élaboré sous l'égide de l'OMS pour renforcer la préparation et la riposte globale aux crises sanitaires. Nous souhaitons également une meilleure application du règlement sanitaire international. Dans ce cadre, nous sommes prêts à œuvrer de manière constructive, engagée pour une décision consensuelle à ce sujet. Et nous nous engageons à jouer un rôle actif dans les efforts mondiaux visant à renforcer le système international de préparation et de réponse aux pandémies. Il s'agit de trouver ensemble, dans le cadre d'un dialogue ouvert, dans le cadre d'un dialogue pragmatique, des solutions que nos citoyennes et citoyens attendent avec une très grande impatience. Je vous souhaite, je nous souhaite des débats fructueux au cours de cette session extraordinaire de l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé. Prenons les décisions qui s'imposent pour avancer. Mais nous y parviendrons seulement si nous continuons à unir nos forces dans un cadre multilatéral transparent et crédible, celui de l'OMS. Le monde nous regarde. Saisissons l'opportunité de cette conférence et soyons audacieux. Merci de votre attention.
Thank you for your attention.
Merci, Monsieur Berset.
Thank you, Mr. Berset.
J'ai maintenant le plaisir
I now have the
d'inviter Son
pleasure of
Excellence,
inviting Her
Madame Angela
Excellency,
Merkel,
Madam
chancelière de
Angela
la République
Merkel,
fédérale d'Allemagne.
Chancellor of the Federal
Madame la
Republic of
chancelière,
Germany.
vous avez la parole.
Madam Chancellor, you have the floor.
Sehr geehrter Herr Generalsekretär, lieber Tedros, sehr geehrte Damen und
Secretary
Herren,
General,
die Coronavirus-Pandemie prägt
the
weiterhin
COVID-19
unseren
pandemic
Alltag.
continues to dominate our
Sie hat
daily lives.
Schwachstellen
It has
aufgezeigt,
highlighted
sie hat aber auch
deficiencies,
unsere
but has also
Solidarität in
revealed
dieser
our
schwierigen
solidarity
Zeit offenbart.
at this difficult time.
Dabei kommt der
The
Weltgesundheitsorganisation die
organization plays
zentrale
a
Rolle zu,
central
die
role in
Koordinierung
ensuring
der
that
zahlreichen
the many
Initiativen in
initiatives on
globalen
global health
Gesundheitsfragen
issues are
sicherzustellen.
coordinated.
Bei der Umsetzung
In
internationaler
implementing international health
Gesundheitsvorschriften,
provisions,
bei der Entsendung
in
wissenschaftlicher
seconding
Experten,
scientific
die
experts to
Ursprünge von
research the
Viren und
origins of
Infektionsausbrüchen
viruses
erforschen,
and infection
oder bei der
outbreaks,
Gestaltung eines
or in
neuen
shaping a
Fonds
new
für
fund
globale
for global health
Gesundheitssicherheit.
security.
Angesichts dieser
Given
und vieler
these and
anderer
many other
wichtiger
important
Aufgaben
tasks,
gilt
we
es vor
need
allem
above
für eine
all to ensure
verlässliche
reliable
Finanzierung
financing
der
for the
WHO zu sorgen.
WHO.
Sie muss in
The organization
Krisensituationen
has to
schnell
be able to
reagieren
react
und
quickly in
Prioritäten
crisis
neu setzen können.
situations and to set new
Daher
priorities
wünsche ich
swiftly.
mir,
It is
dass
thus my
wir,
hope
die
that we, the
Mitgliedstaaten,
members,
unsere
increase our
ungebundenen
assessed
Pflichtbeiträge
contribution significantly.
deutlich, das
That
heißt
means
auf
to
50%
50%.
Die katastrophalen
The catastrophic
gesundheitlichen und
impact of the
wirtschaftlichen Folgen der
COVID-19 pandemic in terms of
Coronavirus-Pandemie
health and the
sollten uns
economy
eine
ought to
Lehre
be a
sein.
lesson to us.
Viren kennen
Viruses
keine
know no
Ländergrenzen.
national
Genau
borders.
deshalb sollten
That's
wir unsere
precisely why we
Maßnahmen
should lay down
für eine
measures to
bessere
be taken to
Prävention,
improve
Früherkennung
prevention,
und Reaktion in einem Pandemievertrag völkerrechtlich
early
verbindlich
detection and
festhalten.
response in internationally
Ich sage ganz
binding
bewusst
fashion.
wir.
I use the word
Dabei
we
erinnere
quite
ich an ein bekanntes
loosely.
Sprichwort,
Let
das
me
lautet:
remind you of a well-known
Wer
saying.
alleine arbeitet, addiert. Wer zusammenarbeitet, multipliziert. Lassen Sie uns in diesem Sinne künftigen
In this
Bedrohungen
spirit,
unserer
let us join forces
Gesundheit
to
mit
counter future
vereinten
threats
Kräften
to our health.
entgegenwirken. Und lassen Sie uns
And let
eher
us sooner rather
heute
than later
als
create a
morgen
firm
verlässliche
foundation on which to
Grundlagen
do
dafür
so.
schaffen. Ihnen allen, die Sie sich hierfür
As we
stark
express my
machen,
sincere thanks
danke
to
ich von
those working
Herzen.
to achieve this
Alles Gute
goal. I
für
wish
Sie
you all the
und
very
natürlich
best, and of
bleiben
course,
Sie
stay
gesund.
healthy.
Merci, Madame la Chancelière.
Thank you, Madam
J'ai le
Chancellor.
plaisir d'inviter
And
Son
I have the
Excellence,
pleasure to
Monsieur
invite
Sebastián
His
Piñera,
Excellency Mr.
Président de la
Sebastián
République du
Piñera,
Chili, à
President of
prendre
the
la parole.
Republic of Chile, to take the floor.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Tedros, for inviting me to be part of this pivotal moment in the history of the World Health Organization, but also in the history of mankind's efforts to effectively control the spread of contagious diseases. And I say this with full awareness of the weight of my words, because the meeting that we inaugurate today is not an ordinary meeting. All of you present in Geneva today face an unprecedented challenge, but also an unprecedented opportunity, one that can make the difference between life and death for millions and millions of people all around the world. During the last 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have all witnessed the tremendous effort put by this organization, by its personnel, and by Dr. Tedros himself. Their tireless work provided us and many other countries with key guidelines and recommendations throughout the darkest part of this pandemic. And they have remained available to provide further advice whenever it was requested or necessary. I know this because I have spoken numerous times with Dr. Tedros, with Dr. Ryans, and with Dr. Llanes, and they have provided invaluable advice that has helped us shape our response to the virus through the strengthening of our health system, the implementation of our testing, tracing, and isolation strategy, our step-by-step plan, and also our massive and successful vaccination program. However, despite all of their heroic efforts, it was not enough. And it was not enough, not because of them, but because the system that we had in place to prepare and respond to pandemics was clearly insufficient. Sadly, this organization was not adequately prepared to face the challenge. It didn't have the tools and the resources that it required to fulfill the crucial role we all expected it to play. And for that weakness, we all paid a great price, a price that was far too high. Steps must be taken to ensure that this will not happen again. That when the next pandemic comes, and it will come, it will find us better prepared, with stronger institutions, with more resources, and with better infrastructure in place. Today, the responsibility to take the first of these steps falls upon you. The working group on strengthening the World Health Organization preparedness and response to health emergency has done a very good job. It has issued a report that will be put before you during this assembly, recommending actions and negotiations to develop a convention, a treaty, or other form of international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response. While you assess this proposal, I humbly ask you to keep in mind two things. First, We cannot keep doing the same thing, employing the same methods, trusting the same instrument, and expect different results. Non-binding instrument will also get us so far, and this is nowhere near far enough. And second, we have already lost enough during the last 2 years. We have lost enough freedom and opportunities. We have lost enough in terms of well-being and quality of life. But above all, and most painfully, we have lost too many lives. You are now responsible for starting the process that will lead all of humanity towards better instrument to ensure that never again are we forced to pay such a high toll. You are all called to ensure that never again the lack of transparency, cooperation, solidarity, and coordination between countries causes avoidable human suffering and death at the scale that has been inflicted upon us during the last 2 years. The mission of this assembly is not easy, but the important tasks never are. This, however, should not discourage us, but on the contrary, should move us to become even more ambitious and determined. A treaty on pandemic, preparedness and response, containing binding obligation, will not be easy to negotiate, and it will require sacrifices and concessions from all the parties involved on its drafting process. But it will be easier, and it will require less sacrifices and less concessions than facing the next pandemic with the same or similar inadequacy that our current system has. Today, through the development of a convention or treaty on pandemic preparedness and response under the World Health Organization umbrella, we have an opportunity to effectively improve our system, to strengthen the global health architecture, to create new channels for information sharing, to promote scientific and technological progress, to increase cooperation and solidarity between our countries, and to make sure that humanity does not go through the last 2 years all over. We must be bold enough to take this opportunity. We cannot afford not to. Thank you very much, and have a very good day.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
J'invite maintenant avec plaisir
I now have the pleasure
Son
of
Altesse
inviting
Royale,
His Royal
le
Highness
Prince Salman
Prince
bin
Salman
Ahmad
bin
Al-Khalifa,
Hamad Al Khalifa,
Prince héritier
Crown
et Premier
Prince
ministre du
and
Royaume du
Prime
Bahreïn,
Minister of the
à
Kingdom of
prononcer son
Bahrain,
allocution.
to deliver his statement.
Your Excellency, Madam President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates. On behalf of His Majesty the King of Bahrain and the people of Bahrain, thank you for having me speak to you this morning. As a global community, we have for decades ignored the urgent calls of public health experts who time and again warned us of fault lines in the global health order and the glaring health disparities between and within nations. Today, as we mourn the loss of over 5 million fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, and as we begin the difficult task of rebuilding the lives of those who survived this devastating pandemic, we must finally be prepared to listen and to act. The coronavirus exposed the world's lack of preparedness and exploited the links that bind us. Without a global plan of action, countries around the world turned inwards, and as a result, we witnessed the breakdown of early detection and alert systems, the absence of standardized containment protocols, the proliferation of misinformation, and a spate of market shocks and supply chain disruptions, which still leave many without ready access to essential goods, diagnostic tools, treatments, and vaccines. It is imperative that we do not lull ourselves into complacency with the false belief that this pandemic is a once-in-a-century anomaly. Instead, we must seize upon this opportunity to enact real change, to approach global pandemic preparedness with the same determination we bring to geopolitical threats to our collective safety and security. Only then will we be able to build a global health system that can one day serve as our first and most effective line of defense against the emergence of communicable diseases. The Kingdom of Bahrain recognized as the coronavirus was just beginning to gather steam, and before it reached our shores, that preparedness and collaboration would determine our ability to successfully navigate a crisis of this magnitude. A full month before registering our first case, we established a war room, that would serve as the nerve center of the country's containment efforts, marshalling resources and people from military and civilian agencies to coordinate a whole-of-country response. Bahrain adopted a policy of radical transparency, which fostered a sense of public trust and collective responsibility. Community leaders, medical practitioners, policymakers, citizens, and residents all came together to form one team that united around a firm sense of shared purpose. This spirit of unity permeated every corner of society. For example, over 50,000 citizens in a country of just 1.5 million people offered their services as volunteers in many different fields. Armed with this team spirit, we were able to increase bed capacity by a factor of 6, secure alternative housing for people living in crowded accommodation, and equip hospitals with enough PPE, ventilators, and medicine. As a result, Bahrain has one of the highest recovery rates in the world, as well as a vaccination coverage of 93% of the eligible population, of which approximately 50% have now been boosted to date. But physical health was not our only priority. Economic and mental health featured prominently in our response. With community buy-in and a world-leading test, trace, and treat system, we were able to avoid the brunt of the crisis without ever having to institute a national-level lockdown. Bahrain's efforts, however effective as a national-level response, are no substitute for a global public health system capable of stopping a pathogen in its tracks. But our experience is instructive insofar as it testifies to the life and death importance of preparedness and early intervention, and demonstrates the value of transparency, collaboration, and an enduring commitment to data-driven, science-led policymaking. We believe these same principles should guide our discussions here today. Ladies and gentlemen, the coronavirus has beset the world with many challenges. None, however, are insurmountable if we are willing to work together. Over the last 2 years, we have witnessed scientists from across the world leapfrog years of research to develop highly effective vaccines in record time. And while the pandemic is full of similar moonshot moments, we have to ensure equal and ready access to these game-changing innovations, particularly in the context of new emerging variants. In fact, vaccine coverage, which stands at over 40% globally, falls under 3% in some countries. And with around 1 billion idle doses in other nations, millions of avoidable deaths are likely to occur. We can solve this challenge and others if only we muster the political will to once again look outwards. It is our hope that the nations of the world will join forces and heed the lessons of this crisis in pursuit of a united front that serves the moral imperative of protecting present and future generations from the scourge of pandemics. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monseigneur.
Thank
J'ai
you,
le
Your
plaisir
Excellency.
d'inviter à
I
présent
have the pleasure now
Son
of
Excellence,
inviting
Monsieur Lionel
His
Rouen
Excellence Mr. Lionel
Njimea,
Rouen Njimea,
Président de la République de
President of the
Nauru,
Republic of
à nous faire
Nauru,
part de ses observations.
to give us his observations.
President of the World Health Assembly, Director General of the World Health Organization, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, warm greetings from Nauru. I am honored to have been invited to make an opening statement at this special session, convened to discuss and assess the benefits of developing a World Health Organization Convention agreement or other international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response. Mr. Vice President, by God's grace, Nauru remains COVID-free today. We have been very fortunate to receive vaccines through the COVAX facility and through our key development partners. However, much of the developing world remains without adequate supplies, and 2 years after the onset of the pandemic, continue to fight the spread of COVID-19. Our prayers and thoughts are with those who have lost loved ones to the pandemic. In March 2020, the government of the Republic of Nauru instigated a whole-of-government approach to address, capture, contain, and mitigate the risk of the pandemic to our island. This approach was and continues to be coordinated by a national task force on COVID-19, mandated by government to determine, implement, and regulate, including stringent border security and health security measures. Government's quick and sustained actions could not have been possible without the support provided by our partners. Fostering intersectoral and intergovernmental cooperation and collaboration is essential if we are to successfully institute a global response and preparedness to COVID-19 and future pandemics. It is therefore imperative that an intergovernmental process, if it were to be established, be diverse and inclusive, ensuring that all stakeholders, not only member countries, are engaged. Continuing to omit countries like the Republic of China, Taiwan creates a gap that undermines global preparedness and response to health emergencies. I urge that we learn from the experience of this pandemic, honor the lives of those lost, and develop and establish an inclusive process to collectively and globally be better prepared to effectively respond to future pandemics and health emergencies. Mr. Vice President, the Republic of Nauru acknowledges the work done by the Working Group on strengthening WHO preparedness and response to health emergencies. Nauru agrees with the general consensus that several key aspects of health emergency preparedness and response may not be addressed solely within the scope of the International Health Regulations 2005, and may be best to address independently either through a potential new instrument or through other normative policy or programmatic tool available through WHO. There is a need for clarity on the way forward with an early decision to whether to strengthen the international health regulations and or to develop a new instrument on health security and pandemic preparedness and response. Due consideration needs to be given to what is currently a global issue of inequitable access to vaccines, diagnostic tools, personal protective equipment, medical consumables, and essential drugs, including new approved drug regimes. The need for sharing data and lesson learning has taken on an increased urgency in this pandemic, as it can literally mean life or death to our people. As this pandemic unfolds, it is clear that no one is safe until we are all safe. The Republic of Nauru, like so many of the small island developing, struggle to sustain this health system under normal times. Given the increasing burden of communicable and non-communicable diseases, therefore enhancing surge capacity needs to be considered on both a country and regional level. The Republic of Nauru supports the call for sustainable financing of the World Health Organization and the potential benefits it would bring. However, in embracing a One Health approach, we need to recognize health as an economic good and therefore need stronger engagement with international financial institutions, private enterprises, and developed economies. Nauru supports all efforts for strengthening global health governance and takes this opportunity to request that future governance arrangements include WHO regions to ensure inclusive dialogue of all stakeholders, particularly across Pacific Island countries. We further note that there is an immediate need to ensure that the special interests of island nations are adequately considered, particularly to ensure equity access to low, middle-income member states. Mr. Vice President, leaving no one behind is a global responsibility. Only through unity and inclusiveness can the global community triumph over this pandemic and future health emergencies, ensuring that no one is indeed left behind. Dubakar, I thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
J'ai le plaisir d'inviter
I
Son
have the pleasure
Excellence,
now of inviting His
Monsieur Charles
Excellence,
Michel,
Mr. Charles
Président du
Michel,
Conseil européen.
President of the European Council, to address the Assembly.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first, I'd like to congratulate you for your courage and for your ambition in organizing this special session of the World Health Assembly. This is only the second time in the history of the World Health Organization that an extraordinary session takes place. Dear friends, today, I hope we will make history. The situation in the world demands it. As we speak, the world faces yet another wave of COVID-19, a clear reminder of our duty to our citizens and to each other. Our collective responsibility to never let another pandemic find us unprepared, uncoordinated, or working in isolation from one another. The outcome of this session and your decisions today are vital to how we will cooperate in the future, how we will prevent, prepare for, detect, and respond to health threats in the future. As you know, I've been a strong advocate for an international treaty or legally binding instrument on pandemic preparedness. We need an incremental change in our global health architecture. I want to warmly and sincerely thank you, Dr. Tedros, for our excellent cooperation and the many leaders and countries that have joined us. All of us, political leaders and leaders of international organizations, must be at the forefront of these global efforts. We must show the world that we can cooperate, build bridges, and find joint solutions. There is no silver bullet, no single way out, and there are no easy solutions in managing the massive challenges of global health threats. But we have already shown that when we do work together, human ingenuity knows no bounds. Developing vaccines in just 10 months is a perfect example, nothing short of a miracle. And now it's time for you, the World Health Assembly, to provide the legal framework for these sustainable solutions. We must guarantee that if another pandemic strikes, we have the vaccines we need along with all other countermeasures. And just as crucially, we must ensure equitable access to these countermeasures. We simply cannot allow the same inequality we have seen and continue to see to repeat itself in future pandemics. That's why we must act One Health. We have a unique opportunity to go to the heart of prevention, and I'm referring to One Health. This is not just a concept. We must translate it into concrete action and tangible instruments. Scientists expect that 70% of future pandemics will stem from zoonotic diseases. So we must better understand the links between human, animal, and environmental health. The One Health approach is not a luxury, it's a must-have for future global health. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you again for your dedication and your efforts to improve global health governance, and for your hard work during this pandemic, and your commitment to prevent the next one. The world is counting on you, and together, let's take bold and decisive action. Yesterday's informal agreement is a huge step. Now it's time to capitalize on this momentum to make the world a safer place for all our citizens. I wish you a fruitful and successful session. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai maintenant l'honneur d'inviter Son Excellence, Madame Ursula von der Leyen, Présidente de la Commission européenne, à prendre la parole.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to salute the determination and the commitment of WHO members, as well as yours personally, dear Dr. Tedros. You and your team have worked tirelessly to uphold the multilateral framework that is so essential for global health security, even when it was difficult to do so. The spirit of collective action is the only true robust answer to fight this pandemic and to fight future pandemics. We started some of that work at the G20 Global Health Summit in May, where the world's major economies vowed to work together to make this the last global pandemic. And with the Rome Declaration signed on that day, we committed to learning the lessons from this pandemic and to be better prepared for the future. And this is why I welcome the World Health Assembly's decision to start negotiations towards an international agreement or other international instrument to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. I also support targeted improvements to the 2005 International Health Regulations, an overall strengthening of the WHO so important, and the establishment of a new financial intermediary fund for global health security and pandemic preparedness. From our side, the European Commission looks forward to inclusive multilateral negotiations starting next year. But there can be no standstill in a pandemic, and we still have urgent tasks ahead of us. As we speak, the global community is faced with the threat of a new, highly transmissible variant of COVID-19, Omicron. This is not the first variant, and this time the world showed it is learning. And I want to say explicitly that I'm personally grateful to the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa for that. South Africa's analytic work and transparency in sharing its results was indispensable in allowing a swift global response. It no doubt saved many lives, and it is a model of how international cooperation should work in the face of cross-border health threats. Because only collective, effective, and immediate responses can work against viruses that, of course, do not respect either borders or good intentions. At the Global Health Summit in May, we agreed to uphold the principles of equity and good governance. We agreed to make multilateral cooperation and solidarity the only viable way forward. The G20 summit repeated that pledge last month in Rome, and you can count on the European Union to make good on that. The European Union and its member states will work very hard to achieve the global vaccination target of 70% in 2022, agreed at the recent G20 summit. And we will support capacity building for sequencing, testing, treatments, and of course, vaccination. We know we can get there, and we will make sure we do. And this is why Europe aims at sharing at least 700 million doses of vaccines by mid-2022 with low and middle income countries. It is why we helped create the ACT Accelerator and provided €3 billion funding, especially for global vaccination through COVAX. And it is also why we are investing heavily in vaccine manufacturing in Africa. And we are also engaging on vaccine manufacturing with South America. Together with our partners, we will do everything needed to overcome this pandemic and to be better prepared for the future. I wish you a successful World Health Assembly. You have an important work ahead of you, and I very much thank you for your attention.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President.
J'ai le plaisir d'inviter le Dr. Richard Hatchett, président directeur général de la Coalition pour les innovations en matière de préparation aux épidémies, à prendre la parole.
Director General Tedros, Mr. Vice President, Your Excellencies, thank you for the invitation to speak at this special session of the World Health Assembly on behalf of the organizations composing the ACT Accelerator. When this special session was planned, we did not anticipate that it would convene at a moment of impending crisis, nor could we have imagined that any crisis could so perfectly epitomize why this special session and the global framework for pandemic preparedness and response that we hope will emerge from it is so necessary. For the emergence of the Omicron variant has fulfilled in a precise way the predictions of the scientists who warned that the elevated transmission of the virus in areas with limited access to vaccine would speed its evolution. Having fully vaccinated less than a quarter of their populations, Botswana and South Africa provided a fertile environment for such evolution. The virus is a ruthless opportunist, and the inequity that has characterized the global response has now come home to roost. The cases were picked up, however, only because Botswana and South Africa do have access to diagnostics and among the highest testing rates on the continent, performing nearly one daily COVID-19 test per 1,000 people. This rate is low compared to much of the world, but much higher than in other parts of Africa. And South Africa has first-rate genomic sequencing capabilities, something many countries around the world lack, which helped us recognize almost immediately how dangerous this new virus may be. South Africa and Botswana's efficient surveillance, early detection and warning, and sharing of information have granted the world precious time to implement containment measures and time to prepare. Our industry partners are now intensively investigating whether our current vaccines have been compromised and consulting with regulators in WHO as they develop new ones just in case. As you embark on this historic special session, I would urge you to keep this example, which is right in front of you, in mind. The world is at a crossroads. We know we will face future global infectious disease emergencies and potential pandemic threats. That is a certainty. What happens when these threats materialize, however, is up to us, and in a very tangible sense, up to you. We urgently need a global framework or convention on pandemic preparedness and response if we are to have any hope of preventing future pandemics, accelerating the global availability of critical medical countermeasures, and ensuring more just outcomes than we have achieved with COVID. We have said often, all of us, that no one is safe unless everyone is safe. And now I would add, and hope all of you agree, and unless all are prepared to respond and to act in accordance with globally agreed norms when new threats emerge. Epidemics and pandemics are one of the greatest threats we will face in the 21st century. Next to climate change, perhaps the greatest. To counter them in the future, we must learn from this experience. We cannot rely on the uncoordinated action of nearly 200 sovereign states to deliver results better than those we have observed to date. We must strengthen the institutions we have, including the technical agencies that I represent here today. And crucially, we must agree on principles for the sharing of data, specimens, and countermeasures, including vaccines. Thank you, and I wish you a successful meeting.
Merci, Dr. Hachette.
Thank you, Dr. Hatchett.
Enfin, j'ai le plaisir d'inviter
Finally, I have the pleasure of
Professeur
inviting
Dale Fischer,
Professor Dale
président
Fisher,
du comité d'orientation
President
du
of the
Réseau
Global
mondial
Outbreak
d'alerte et
Alert and
d'action en
Response
cas
Network,
d'épidémie,
GOHARN,
à présenter ses
to
observations.
present his remarks.
Network was established by WHO in 2000 and now engages over 270 technical, operational and academic institutions to support countries in alert and rapid response to infectious disease outbreaks and other health emergencies. In addition, it leads research and training endeavours that aim to improve the quality of outbreak response. We thank the IPPPR, IHR Review Committee and the IOAC for acknowledging this work by GOHARN partners in their reports. Outbreaks expose vulnerabilities in any setting and any capacity, whether they relate to governance, resources, or systems. The foundation of outbreak resilience is built on sound preparedness with robust health systems and healthy populations. Building emergency capability requires coordination to enable a rapid scaling up of the core capacities, including clinical care, surveillance, contact tracing, quarantine, and isolation. Other critical systems to scale in an emergency, such as COVID-19, include laboratory capacity, logistics, infection prevention and control, while maintaining usual essential health services. Community engagement is repeatedly underestimated in outbreaks and continues as a notable challenge in this pandemic. The basics of outbreak response need to be better appreciated and supported by leadership, engaging the right outbreak responders, public health experts and scientists to support implementation. GOHARN network partners have over the past 21 years been involved in all major outbreaks and deployed over 3,500 experts through WHO to support countries for response. Trust, credibility and expertise has been built based on the personal integrity, ethics and commitment of individual experts with support from their primary institutions. Our collaboration of robust technical and scientific skills can provide a bedrock of preparedness, networking and strengthening international solidarity in addition to acute response. Investments in national public health institutions, technical institutions and networks will benefit all if conceived within a global collaborative spirit that GOHARN demonstrates. We advocate for a building block investment in community and national capacities. Our network partners can support this. We believe in strengthening national health authorities, technical agencies and multi-sectoral stakeholders. Global health security requires enhanced governance in the broadest sense. Equity, greater accountability, and adherence to international norms and standards are essential for effective outbreak response and to protect and support the most vulnerable. The operational capacities of our 270 experienced technical partners that form the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network can be leveraged to help develop better systems and expand the emergency health workforce at country and international levels. But this requires investment in those partners and increased technical collaboration and coordination, which is quite feasible building on the existing Go-On paradigm. Thank you for giving Go-On this opportunity.
Merci, professeur Fischer.
Thank you, Professor Fischer.
Nous tenons à remercier sincèrement tous nos
We would
éminents
like to
invités
extend our sincerest
pour leurs
thanks
paroles
to all our
d'encouragement et pour avoir
distinguished guests for
rappelé
their words of
la
encouragement
nécessité de
and
la
for reminding us
solidarité
how
mondiale.
important global solidarity
J'ai l'honneur
is.
d'inviter à présent
I have the honor
le
now
directeur général
of
de
inviting
l'Organisation
the
mondiale de la
Director General
santé.
of the World Health
Dr.
Organization
Tedros, vous avez la parole.
to speak. Dr. Tedros, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency, President of the Assembly, Professor Benjamin Hong-Patin, Your Excellency, Dr. Hanan Al-Kuwari, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. I thank His Excellency, President Tokayev, for his participation and message this morning. And I thank each of our distinguished guests for their messages. Federal Chancellor Alain Berset of Switzerland, Chancellor Merkel of Germany, President Piñera of Chile, His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad of Bahrain, and President Ainigema of Nauru, President Michel of EU Council, and President von der Leyen of EU Commission, Dr. Hachette of CEPI, and Dr. Fischer of GORM. Everybody knows that pestilences have a way of recurring in the world. There have been as many plagues as wars in history. Yet always plagues and wars take people equally by surprise. Those words were written by the French writer Albert Camus in his classic novel La Peste, The Plague, in 1947. 74 years later, they have a disturbing presence. Outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics are a fact of nature and a recurring feature of recorded history. From the plague of Athens in 4030 BC to the Black Death, the 1918 influenza pandemic, and now COVID-19. But that does not mean we're helpless to prevent them, prepare for them, or mitigate their impact. We're not prisoners of fate or nature. More than any humans in history, we have the ability to anticipate pandemics, to prepare for them, to unravel the genetics of pathogens, to detect them at their earliest stages, to prevent them spiraling into global disasters, and to respond when they do. And yet, here we are, entering the third year of the most acute health crisis in a century, and the world remains in its grip. This pestilence, one that we can prevent, detect and treat, continues to cast a long shadow over the world. Instead of meeting in the aftermath of the pandemic, we're meeting as a fresh wave of cases and deaths crashes into Europe, with untold and uncounted deaths around the world. And although other regions are seeing declining or stable trends, if there is one thing we have learned, it's that no region, no country, no community, and no individual is safe until we are all safe. The emergence of the highly mutated Omicron variant underlines just how perilous and precarious our situation is. South Africa and Botswana should be thanked for detecting, sequencing, and reporting this variant, not penalized. Indeed, Omicron demonstrates just why the world needs a new accord on pandemics. Our current system disincentivizes countries from alerting others to threats that will inevitably land on their shores. We don't yet know whether Omicron is associated with more transmission, more severe disease, more risk of reinfections, or more risk of evading vaccines. Scientists at WHO and around the world are working urgently to answer these questions. We shouldn't need another wake-up call. We should all be wide awake to the threat of this virus. But Omicron's very emergence is another reminder that although many of us might think we're done with COVID-19, it's not done with us. We're living through a cycle of panic and neglect. Hard-won gains could vanish in an instant. Our most immediate task, therefore, is to end this pandemic. Indeed, our ability to end this pandemic is a test of our collective ability to prevent, respond effectively to future pandemics, because the same principles apply. The same principles: courageous and compassionate leadership, fidelity to science, generosity in sharing the fruits of research, and an unshakable commitment to equity and solidarity. If we cannot apply those principles now to tame COVID-19, how can we hope to prevent history repeating? And we cannot end this pandemic unless we solve the vaccine crisis. In less than a year, almost 8 billion vaccines have been administered around the world, the largest vaccination campaign in history. More than a year ago, before the first vaccines were approved, WHO and our partners established the ACT Accelerator, COVAX, and CTAP to facilitate equitable access to vaccines, tests, treatments, and PPE. And we have shown that these mechanisms work. COVAX has now shipped more than 550 million vaccine doses, including almost 250 million doses in the last 2 months, more than it shipped in the first 7 months of this year. Last week, CTAP and the Medicines Patent Pool finalized its first licensing agreement with the Spanish National Research Council, a transparent, global, and non-exclusive license for a serological antibody test. My thanks to Spain and to His Excellency President Carlos Alvarado Quesada of Costa Rica for his leadership in initiating CTAP. So thanks to the President of Spain, President Pedro, and also President of Costa Rica, President Quesada. Earlier this year, we also established a technology transfer hub for mRNA vaccines in South Africa to facilitate local production and regional self-reliance. But a year ago, as we began to see some countries striking bilateral deals with manufacturers, we warned that the poorest and most vulnerable would be trampled in the global stampede for vaccines. And that's exactly what has happened. More than 80% of the world's vaccines have gone to G20 countries. Low-income countries, most of them in Africa, have received just 0.6% of all vaccines. We understand and support every government's responsibility to protect its own people. It's natural. But vaccine equity is not charity. It's in every country's best interests. No country can vaccinate its way out of the pandemic alone. The longer vaccine inequity persists, the more opportunity this virus has to spread and evolve in ways we cannot predict nor prevent. We're all in this together. We call on every member state to support the targets to vaccinate 40% of the population of every country by the end of this year, and 70% by the middle of next year. 103 countries still have not reached the 40% target, and more than half of them are at risk of missing it by the end of the year, mainly because they cannot access the vaccines they need, and most of them in Africa. Even as some countries are now beginning to vaccinate groups at very low risk of severe disease, or to give boosters to healthy adults, just 1 in 4 health workers in Africa has been vaccinated. This is unacceptable. With emerging evidence of some waning vaccine immunity against infection, it's clear that in future countries will need tailored booster strategies. WHO's position remains that health workers, older people, and other at-risk groups must be vaccinated first in all countries before those at low risk of serious disease and before boosters are given to already vaccinated healthy adults. There is no doubt that vaccines have saved many lives and helped to quell the pandemic in many countries. Countries that have achieved the highest vaccination rates are now seeing a decoupling between cases and deaths. But in too many countries and communities, the bright light of vaccines has also become a blinding light to the continued need for other tools to stop this virus spreading, to stop it overwhelming our health systems, and to stop it killing. Vaccines save lives, but they do not fully prevent infection or transmission. Until we reach high levels of vaccination in every country, suppressing transmission remains essential. We don't mean lockdowns, which are a last resort in the most extreme circumstances. We mean a tailored and comprehensive package of measures that strike a balance between protecting the rights, freedoms, and livelihoods of individuals while protecting the health and safety of the most vulnerable members of communities. Ending this pandemic is not about vaccines or, it's about vaccines and. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, COVID-19 has now killed more than 5 million people, and they're just the reported deaths. The excess deaths caused by the virus and by disruption to essential health services are far higher. An unknown number live with post-COVID condition or long COVID, a condition we're only beginning to understand. Health systems continue to be overwhelmed. Millions have missed out on essential life-saving health services for non-communicable diseases and mental health. Progress against HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and many other diseases has stalled or gone backwards. Millions of children have missed out on vaccinations for other life-threatening diseases and months of education. Millions of people have lost their jobs or been plunged into poverty. The global economy is still clawing its way out of recession. Political divisions have deepened nationally and globally. Inequalities have widened. Science has been undermined. Misinformation has abounded. And it will all happen again unless you, the nations of the world, can come together to say with one voice, never again. At its heart, the pandemic is a crisis of solidarity and sharing. The lack of sharing of information and data by many countries in the early days of the pandemic hindered our collective ability to get a clear picture of its profile and trajectory. The lack of sharing of biological samples hindered our collective ability to understand how the virus was evolving. The lack of sharing of PPE, tests, vaccines, technology, know-how, intellectual property, and other tools hindered our collective ability to prevent infections and save lives. And the lack of a consistent and coherent global approach has resulted in a splintered and disjointed response, breeding misunderstanding, misinformation, and mistrust. The fabric of multilateralism has been frayed. COVID-19 has exposed and exacerbated fundamental weaknesses in the global architecture for pandemic preparedness and response. Complex and fragmented governance, inadequate financing, and insufficient systems and tools, voluntary mechanisms have not solved these challenges. The best way we can address them is with a legally binding agreement between nations, an accord forged from the recognition that we have no future but a common future. Nations coming together to find common ground is the only way to make sustainable progress against common threats. It's not perfect, and it's not a panacea. It takes compromise. No one gets everything they want, but that's better than so many missing out on what they need. In 2005, the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control came into force, the first international treaty negotiated under the World Health Organization. An independent impact assessment of the FCTC, the convention in 2016 found it has contributed to significant and rapid progress in protecting people from exposure to tobacco smoke. In regulating the packaging and labeling of tobacco products, in education, communication, training, and public awareness, in banning sales to and by minors, and in reporting and exchange of information. The WHO FCTC is the legal bedrock of tobacco control, which countries have used to implement new measures and to defend those measures from legal challenges. The bottom line, the implementation of the FCTC has helped to save more than 37 million lives and counting, and global prevalence of tobacco use has declined from almost 33% in 2000 to 22% today. The impact assessment found that without the FCTC, it's unlikely that all these tobacco control measures would have taken place in such a comprehensive, coordinated, and effective manner. So, comprehensive, coordinated, effective. Three words that history will not use to describe the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, if countries can unite to negotiate a treaty against the human-made threat of tobacco, against the destructive potential of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, against the existential threat of climate change, and against so many other threats to our shared security and well-being, then surely, very surely, the time has come for countries to agree on a common, binding approach to a common threat that we cannot fully control nor prevent. A threat that comes from our relationship with nature itself. I thank and congratulate all member states for the spirit of solidarity and the inclusive process that has resulted in the agreed text of the decision that's before you at this assembly. I thank Indonesia and the United States of America for their leadership of the working group on strengthening WHO preparedness, as well as the other members of the Bureau, Botswana, France, Iraq, and Singapore. I also thank Australia and Chile for their leadership in developing the decision that you will consider at this assembly. And I thank the President Charles Michel of European Council for proposing the idea of a binding agreement on pandemics and for his leadership and tireless advocacy. Thank you, my friend. And this is a historic moment, but it's just the end of the beginning. We still have a long road to travel together. Reaching our destination will take negotiation, compromise, and time. The task is urgent, but it also requires patience. The stakes are high, but so are the rewards. A convention, agreement, or other international instrument will not solve every problem, but it will provide the overarching framework to foster greater international cooperation and provide a platform for strengthening global health security in 4 key areas. First, better governance. The governance of global health security is complex, fragmented, and has failed to ensure effective collective action and equitable access to vaccines and other tools. High-level threats need high-level political engagement, which is why we support the idea of a Heads of State Council proposed by the IPPR, the panel, anchored in WHO to provide high-level political leadership for rapid and coordinated action. I propose the Council could be supported by a ministerial standing committee under the Executive Board, which is already proposed and waiting, hopefully, approval during our upcoming board meeting. Second, better financing. Cycles of panic and neglect have created an unstable and unpredictable financing ecosystem for global health security. Strengthening the world's defenses demands financing that's truly additional, predictable, equitable, and aligned with national, regional, and global priorities. A mechanism funded solely from voluntary development assistance will only increase competition for already scarce resources. WHO supports the idea of a financial intermediary fund supported by a secretariat based at WHO, housed at the World Bank, and financed by countries and regional organizations on a burden-sharing basis. Third, we need better systems and tools to predict, prevent, detect, and respond rapidly to outbreaks with epidemic and pandemic potential. Already, the Secretariat has taken steps to start building some of those systems and tools. In September, we opened the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence in Berlin, a new center designed to enhance global surveillance by harnessing the power of collaborative and artificial intelligence and other cutting-edge technologies. Other initiatives are in development, including the WHO BioHub system to provide a reliable, safe, predictable, and transparent mechanism for countries to share novel biological materials. Several member states are now piloting the Universal Health and Preparedness Review, a peer review mechanism for enhancing national preparedness modeled on the Universal Periodic Review used by the United Nations Human Rights Council. This was suggested by my friend, Ambassador Sambo of Central African Republic, and thank you, Ambassador Sambo, and it's going well. And last week, the Scientific Advisory Group for the Origins of Novel Pathogens, or SEGO, held its first meeting, a new permanent body to establish a more systematic way of identifying the source of new outbreaks. At the same time, we must use and enhance the tools we already have, including the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, GORN, and the Global Influenza Surveillance and Response Systems, GISRIS, and the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework. And fourth, the world needs a strengthened, empowered, and sustainably financed WHO at the center of the global health architecture. With 194 member states and 152 country offices, WHO has unique expertise, a unique global mandate, unique global reach, and unique global legitimacy. But over several decades, WHO has been progressively weakened by a debilitating imbalance between assessed and voluntary earmarked contributions that distorts our budget and constrains our ability to deliver what you, our member states, expect of us. The widening mismatch between the expectations of WHO and its resources is well known. COVID-19 must be the catalyst to rectify it. If not now, when? I ask all member states to support the proposal in the draft report of the Working Group on Sustainable Financing when it meets again in 2 weeks' time. And I thank Björn Kummel, the chair of the Working Group, for his leadership. One of the greatest risks to global health security now is to further weaken WHO or to further fragment the global health architecture. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, the COVID-19 pandemic is a powerful demonstration that health is not a luxury, but a human right. Not a cost, but an investment. Not simply an outcome of development, but the foundation of social, economic, and political stability and security. In the coming months and years, other crises will demand our attention and distract us from the urgency of taking action now. Now is the time for all countries to make the choice to invest in a healthier, safer, and fairer future. Global health security is too important to be left to chance or goodwill or shifting geopolitical currents or the vested interests of companies and shareholders. That means a continuing commitment to universal health coverage built on the foundation of primary health care. I once again thank President Tokayev and the government of Kazakhstan, Rahmet, for his leadership in primary health care from Almata in 1978 to Astana in 2018. Albert Camus published his novel in 1947, the year before the Constitution of the World Health Organization came into effect. The Constitution is, of course, itself a treaty, a binding pact between nations, a vision that recognizes that the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human. But more than that, it affirms that health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security, and is dependent upon the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. Camus said that, I quote, "What's true of all the evils in the world is true of the plague as well. It helps men and women to rise above themselves," end of quote. In the aftermath of the Second World War, our forebears rose above themselves to found the United Nations and this World Health Organization. Now is our moment to rise above this pandemic, to rise above the impulses of isolationism, to rise above rivalry, suspicion, and mistrust, to rise above nearsightedness of election cycles and media cycles, to build on the legacy from which we have all benefited, and to leave a new legacy for the generations who will follow. Let it be said, decades from now, when each of us is nothing more than photographs and memories, that we left the world a healthier, safer, fairer place than we found it. I like this, so if you allow me, I will repeat. Let it be said, decades from now, when each of us is nothing more than photographs and memories, that we left the world a healthier, safer, fairer place than we found it. I thank you, and merci beaucoup, Chair.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur Général.
Thank you, Director General.
Avant de poursuivre, permettez-moi
Before
de
we
faire quelques
continue,
remarques
please allow me to
préliminaires.
make a few opening remarks.
Madame Dechen Wangmo, présidente de
Madam
l'Assemblée
Dechen
mondiale
Wangmo,
de
President
l'OMS,
of the World Health Assembly,
chers collègues vice-présidents de
distinguished
l'Assemblée
fellow
mondiale
vice
de
presidents
l'OMS,
of the World Health Assembly,
Monsieur le Directeur général de l'OMS,
Director
Mesdames et
General,
Messieurs,
the WHO, ladies and gentlemen,
je me réjouis de
I'm
participer à
very
cette
pleased
deuxième
to be
session
taking part
extraordinaire de
in the
notre
second special
organisation.
session of our organization.
Je voudrais adresser
I'd
mes
like
vives
to
félicitations
sincerely
à
commend
la présidente du bureau
the
de l'Assemblée
President of the
mondiale
Bureau of the World Health
pour son
Assembly
leadership dans la
for
gestion des
her
grands sujets de
leadership in
préoccupation de
handling
notre
major topics of
organisation depuis
concern
mai
of
2021
WHO since
que
May
nous avons été
2021,
élus à la
which we determined
74e
at
Assemblée
the
mondiale.
74th
Je voudrais, chers
WHA.
collègues, vous remercier de
Distinguished
l'honneur qui est
colleagues,
fait
I'd
au
like to
Bénin à ma
thank you
modeste
for
personne
conferring on
pour présider en
my
l'absence de
humble
notre
self
président de
the
cette session.
honor of presiding in the absence
Chers
of our
collègues
President.
honorables invités, Nous tenons cette
Distinguished
deuxième
colleagues
session
and guests,
extraordinaire
we're holding the
dans
second
l'histoire de
special
l'OMS
session,
dans un
second in the
contexte
history of the
particulier
WHO,
marqué par
under
la pandémie de la
extraordinary circumstances
COVID-19
marked by the
qui n'épargne
COVID-19 pandemic,
aucun pays,
which has spared
qui évolue de
no
vague en
country,
vague,
which
les
is
unes
evolving
plus
wave
meurtrières
after
que les
wave, each
autres,
better than the last,
avec des variants
with
qui
variants
essaient de
emerging that
défier
are
notre arsenal de
challenging
riposte au
our
quotidien.
response toolkit on a daily
Le dernier en
basis.
date, le
The
variant
latest such
Omicron,
variant,
focalise
the
toute notre
Omicron
attention depuis
variant,
quelques
has been
jours.
the focus of our attention for several
Je
days
nous
now.
encourage à renforcer
I
nos
would encourage
stratégies
all of
intégrées
us to
et concertées de
strengthen our
riposte,
integrated
notamment la
and
vaccination,
collective response strategies,
pour
including
qu'ensemble et
vaccination
dans
in
un délai
particular,
raisonnable, nous
so
puissions
that
contrôler la
together, within a
propagation
reasonable
de ce
time
virus
frame, we can
dévastateur.
contain the spread of this devastating
Je
virus.
salue à cet effet toutes
I
les
therefore
initiatives
commend all the
prises par la
initiatives
Direction générale de
taken by
l'OMS
the
pour
leadership of
faciliter
WHO to
l'accès équitable
facilitate
aux vaccins
equitable
et à la
access
vaccination
to
contre la
vaccines
COVID-19,
and vaccination against
particulièrement pour les pays
COVID-19,
de la région
especially
africaine.
for African countries.
Je voudrais réaffirmer
I'd like
tout le
to
soutien des pays
reiterate
membres à notre
the
directeur
support
général
of the member
pour son
states,
leadership
for our Director
extraordinaire
General,
et sa
for his
ténacité dans la
exceptional leadership
coordination
and
de nos actions
perseverance in
communes en ce
coordinating
moment
our collective
difficile.
action during this
Vous
difficult
l'avez
time.
prouvé à suffisance par vos acclamations
You
nourries.
have proved
Chers
yourself
collègues,
more than worthy
honorables
of our
invités,
support.
partant des expériences
Distinguished
vécues dans la
colleagues
gestion
and
de la crise de la
guests, in light
COVID-19,
of the
nous
experiences
devons
we've
tous
all had
travailler à
in
améliorer
managing
nos capacités
the
collectives de
COVID-19 crisis,
réaction
we must work
face aux
together
menaces
to
et
improve our
urgences
collective
sanitaires de
capacity
portée
to
internationale
respond to international
afin
health
de mieux protéger nos
threats and
populations
emergencies, to better
et
protect
rendre
our
le monde plus
populations
sûr.
and to make the world safer.
C'est pourquoi
That is
j'apprécie
why
à sa
I
juste
am
valeur
pleased
que notre session
that
examine le point
our session
principal
will be
inscrit à l'ordre du
examining
jour
the main item on our
qui,
agenda,
justement,
which
revient sur les avantages
concerns
de disposer d'un
the
instrument
benefits
international
of an
sur la
international
préparation et la
instrument
riposte aux
on
épidémies.
pandemic response and
Je remercie
preparedness.
le groupe de travail des
I'd
États
like to
membres
thank the
sur le
member states
renforcement de la
working
préparation et
group
de la riposte de l'OMS
on
aux urgences
strengthening
sanitaires
WHO preparedness and
pour les
response to
propositions
health emergencies,
pertinentes qui seront
for the
soumises à notre
relevant proposals
appréciation.
that have been submitted for
Je reste
our
convaincu
review.
qu'une
I am
approche
deeply
globale et
convinced that
concertée est la
a
voie la mieux
global
indiquée
and
pour faire
collaborative
face aux
approach is the
défis
best
globaux de santé dans le
solution
monde
for global
et l'unique
health
chemin
challenges
pour
throughout the
l'atteinte des
world
objectifs
and
de
the
développement
only
durable.
way to achieve
Je nous
the
souhaite de
SDGs.
fructueuses
I wish
délibérations
all of us
dans un
productive
esprit de tolérance
deliberations
et d'écoute
in a
les uns
spirit
des autres.
of tolerance
Je
and
vous remercie.
openness toward one another. Thank you.
Cela me fait donc à la cérémonie d'ouverture.
This brings the opening ceremony to an end.
L'Assemblée mondiale de la santé va à présent
The World Health Assembly will
examiner
now
les procédures
consider
spéciales
the
devant
special
régir la conduite
procedures
des
to
séances
regulate the
hybrides de sa
conduct of the
deuxième session
hybrid meetings
extraordinaire
of the second special
qui
session,
figure à l'annexe du document
which are contained in the
SSA2
annex of document
/2.
ASS2/2.
Comme nous le savons tous,
As we all know,
le document dont
the
nous sommes
document
saisis
before us
aujourd'hui a
today
fait l'objet de
has been the subject
consultations
of informal
informelles
consultations
faisant intervenir l'ensemble des États
involving
membres.
all member states.
Puis-je considérer que
May I take
l'Assemblée
it
de la
that the
santé
Health
se
Assembly is
satisfait
content to
d'adopter les
adopt
procédures
special
spéciales
procedures
figurant à l'annexe du
contained
document
in the annex of document
SSA2/2 et
ASS2/2
de les appliquer à la présente
and to
session
apply them to
extraordinaire
the special session?
Je ne vois aucune objection.
I see
Cette
no
proposition est donc
objections.
adoptée.
It is so decided.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
Les États membres qui souhaitent
Member
présenter
states wishing
une
to
motion d'ordre,
raise a point of order,
exercer un droit
exercise
de
a right of
réponse
reply, or
ou
request for
demander
a
une motion de
procedural motion
procédure
should do so,
doivent le faire soit
either
en levant
by
la plaque
raising their
portant le nom de leur
nameplate,
État, si le membre
if
de
the
la délégation
delegation
est physiquement
member is
présent,
physically present,
soit en
or
envoyant
by
un
sending a message
au numéro de
to the
téléphone
following
suivant
telephone number
par
by
SMS
SMS,
ou par
text,
WhatsApp.
or by WhatsApp.
Plus 41
Plus 41
79
79
467
467
28 70.
28 70.
Ce numéro est le même que celui utilisé par les États membres lors d'autres
This
réunions
number is the
récentes
same
des
number
organes
that member states
directeurs
used during other
et il
recent
peut
governing
être
body meetings,
utilisé uniquement
and it may be
pour les
used
motions d'ordre
only
les
for points
demandes
of
de droit de
order,
réponse
requests
ou
for rights
d'autres
of
motions de
reply,
procédure.
or other procedural motions.
Il ne doit être utilisé pour aucune
It
autre
may not be
question.
used for any other
En
matter.
outre, je
In
tiens à
addition,
préciser
I would
que je
like to
propose
make clear
d'accorder le droit de réponse
that I
s'il est
propose to
demandé
accord the right of
à
reply
la fin de
if
chaque
it is
journée.
sought at the end of each day.
Les délégués sont priés de veiller à ce que leurs
Delegates
interventions
are
soient
kindly
aussi brèves que
required,
possible
requested to keep their
et,
interventions as
par
brief as
souci de
possible,
l'horaire à
and in
respecter,
the interest of
il
time,
serait
it would be
apprécié que ces
appreciated
interventions se
if
limitent à
interventions
3
could be
minutes
limited
au maximum.
to 3 minutes maximum.
Les délégués à l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé
The World Health
se
Assembly
rappelleront
delegates
peut-être
may
qu'à la
recall
74e
that
session,
at the WHO
la
74,
docteure Amelia Flores
Dr. Amelia
du
Flores
Guatemala
of Guatemala
avait été élue
was
vice-présidente
elected
pour la
as
région des
vice
Amériques.
president from the region of the Americas.
Je pense savoir que depuis lors,
Since
la
then,
docteure
If you are the
Flores
meeting host, please enter your host key followed by pound.
Je pense savoir que depuis lors, la
since
docteure
then,
Flores
I
n'est plus en mesure de
believe I
siéger à ce
understand that Dr.
poste.
Flores is no longer available
Dans ce
to serve in this
contexte,
position.
La région des Amériques a
I
tenu des
understand, therefore, that the
consultations
region of the
et
Americas
propose
has
que le
consulted
docteur
and
Francisco
proposes
José
that
Coma
Dr.
Martin,
Francisco José Coma Martin,
ministre de la Santé du
Minister of Health of
Guatemala,
Guatemala,
soit élu
be elected
vice-président.
as vice president.
Puis-je considérer que
Do I
l'Assemblée
take
de la
it that the
Santé
Health
est
Assembly
d'accord avec
agrees
cette
with this
proposition?
proposal?
Nous avons quelques soucis avec la
I'm
connexion
sorry, we
Internet.
seem
Nous
to
allons
have
attendre
a
quelques minutes pour
internet
s'assurer qu'il
connection
pour
problem,
poursuivre
and
les
we'll just
travaux.
wait for a few moments
Merci.
before we continue our work. Thank you.
You are in the meeting now.
Amesema hivyo, sikuona mimi.
Every advance we made, be it in the diagnostics, be it in the vaccine, came as a response of sharing risk, sharing knowledge, and sharing capacity.
English channel, testing, testing.